Good evening, everyone. Severe Weather Team 9 meteorologist Nathan John joining you for this edition of Nate at 8. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Wednesday evening, and certainly felt it today. I'm seeing a return of more comfortable conditions. Finally, a break from that heat and humidity in place for today. And a lot of what we saw today does carry over into the 4th of July before we'll notice that uptick in the heat and humidity for this weekend. Not as much fog going into tomorrow morning, likely with respect to what we had for this morning, and after some potentially more isolated areas of fog for Thursday morning, lift to give way to plenty of sunshine again for tomorrow, and that will likely carry over into the holiday weekend. And into the holiday weekend, those rain chances also remain low. So this is a pleasant stretch of weather that we are tracking, looking ahead, going through the holiday weekend. So without further ado, let's jump into things, shall we? Our current temperatures now across the area residing still closer to that 80-degree mark, topping off around the mid-80s for this afternoon. Again, temperature is going to be similar again for tomorrow. Temperature is really not a big highlight of today, though, right? It was certainly more of this. This was the big change we noticed for today. These dew points back near 60, and that range about 60 to 65 is where we typically feel that humidity, but I would say that's the range where it's more tolerable. So, while you may still have felt that humidity, it is certainly more tolerable today. And well, when you spend over a week long with dew points in that red range of 60 to from 70 to 75, you spend over a week in this range, and by the time you get in down here, it does feel more refreshing. It's just a matter of what we've been accustomed to, but this is where we've been for a lot of the past over 7, even 9 days, over the past almost 10 days, really. We've been in this range for a lot of that stretch, 70 to 75. This is just unbearably humid. You start to almost instantly sweat when you step outside the door. And again, for today, back into this range where it's certainly more tolerable. And as you notice, we look ahead going from Wednesday to Thursday and then going into even 4th of July and Friday. For a lot of this stretch, I know at times we can get above 65, but for a lot of this stretch, you'll notice going through the 4th of July that we are in this range for a lot of this stretch. So this humidity does remain more tolerable likely through Independence Day. Now, the story does begin to change by the weekend. You'll notice by Saturday, there's still a sliver of the day where we're within this range, but more of it's going to start to be spent in that 65 to 70 range, and then likely all of Sunday and all of Monday, 65 to 70, maybe at times Monday even starting to creep above 70 degrees for a dew point. And that 65 to 70 range is when it's uncomfortably humid, and 70 to 75 plus is just unbearably humid. So we are getting back to some uncomfortable conditions, unfortunately, for the weekend, especially by the time we get into Sunday. But for the weekend in general, it's going to start to turn more uncomfortable and pleasant to be outside. But that being said, the weather's still cooperating outside of that because rain chances are not going to be ramping up with that heat and humidity for the weekend. And those high temperatures here near term, not too far from where we were for today, generally around the mid 80s, maybe more upper 80s Friday, but not too much different with respect to today. Now, I think the further warm up will be then felt for the weekend into early next week. This is when high temperatures are going to be nearing 90 Saturday into the 90s Sunday and near 90 on Monday. So this is when that heat, and again, we just talked about that humidity, starts to become a bit more excessive by this weekend and into early next week. So you factor in the heat and the humidity, and it can feel into the 90s easily Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And I think by Sunday, maybe even a bit higher than the mid 90s. I think it's possible to even feel more upper 90s for the heat index Sunday afternoon. So this heat does become a bit more excessive Saturday, Sunday, and going into Monday as well. Not to the extent likely where it's over 100, 105 degrees for heat index, where we may see a heat advisory issued, but I think we could still be close to 100 Sunday. So I don't think it's going to be far. But yeah, you get the idea. It starts to become more excessive. It's hot, humid stretch by the weekend that will carry over into early next week. But at least here near term, we get to enjoy a quiet stretch of weather. Radar currently picking up on a couple light showers. You might have spotted that brief light shower looking into a portion of Wetzel County south there and near Morgantown as well. And, this is what we can see at times as we go through this stretch. Not a whole lot of precipitation, but, there's that possibility for this pop-up shower and maybe a thunderstorm into the afternoon, the evening hours as we really go through this stretch through the weekend. It's not a big rain threat, but there is that possibility for that shower thunderstorm in the evening. But much like what we had for today, mainly, if not completely dry conditions, right? There is no high rain threat in sight as we go into the 4th of July. Now, when I do think the best chance is there to spot that isolated shower and thunderstorm is actually likely going to set up to be for your Thursday, for tomorrow in the afternoon and evening. And Futurecast is picking up on it. And I think it's doing a good job illustrating the fact that, again, anything that develops is still more isolated. Most of us still remain dry, but, if we're picking up that pop-up shower, thunderstorm, I think a little higher odds for Thursday with respect to what we're going to see for your 4th of July on Friday, or even going into the weekend. As you can see, just in general, just some quiet weather will be with us. A good amount of sunshine, just a pleasant stretch of weather, really, as we go into the weekend. So we break it down, this rain chance of the next 5 days. Again, great odds to stay dry going through the weekend. These are not high rain threats at all. Again, a little higher threat, I think, overall with respect to Friday and Sunday for that shower thunderstorm in the afternoon, evening. But, you're talking about 70% chance for tomorrow. Excuse me, 80% chance Friday and Sunday. Those are great odds to stay dry. More likely than not, you're staying dry from Thursday, Friday, as well as into Sunday as we go through the holiday weekend. But by Monday is when I think the story begins to change. I think more of us are picking up that round of rain into the afternoon, evening. At that point, the scattered showers and thunderstorms are looking likely early next week. But it does look to hold off as we extend through the holiday weekend. And looking at your holiday weekend, again, for the 4th of July and Friday, highs are well in the 80s. Humidity, not too bad still. It's not going to feel a whole lot warmer than the actual air temperature for Friday on the 4th, but by the weekend it will. So those highs are nearing 90 Saturday, but it will feel like it's in the 90s. By Sunday, they're topping off likely around 90, lower 90s, and it'll feel well in the 90s likely Sunday afternoon. So that heat and humidity more excessive Saturday and Sunday with respect to what we're going to see for Friday on the 4th. But in general, good amount of sunshine, low rain threat. At most, maybe that straight pop-up shower, thunderstorm in the afternoon, the evening. Nothing to put a damper on any outdoor plans, and overall going to be a pleasant stretch of weather as we do extend through the holiday weekend as we do look ahead. So as we jump into our 9+1 day forecasts, let's catch up on some comments. Joining us for this evening for this edition of Nate at 8. Joe, good evening to you. Austin joining us on YouTube, good evening. Today was another warm day. Not excited for the loud fireworks this Friday. And yeah, it's certainly warm, but not as bad, was it? You may notice that this morning as well. I mean, you stepped outside this morning and all of a sudden it wasn't so warm and muggy. We just had a relentless stretch of those warm, muggy mornings. And you may have noticed that for yourself. Pretty foggy start to the morning, but certainly was more cool and comfortable for this morning with respect to what we've had here for over a week straight of these warm, muggy mornings. Thank goodness the heat index will be under with no heat warnings. And yeah, I think they'll stay just under that threshold. Maybe if we do see one day, it would be Sunday, but maybe we could get closer to 100 for heat index Sunday. But yeah, it doesn't look like, it does become a bit more excessive, but with respect to what we're dealing with now and into Friday by the weekend and early next week, but not as excessive, I think, as what we just came off of with that string of those very hot and humid days where we had that heat advisory in effect for a long period of time, several days in a row. I don't think we're getting to that extent with this hot stretch of weather returning this weekend and early next week. But that being said, we're not far from it. Still want to practice your heat safety when going out for the weekend. I know a lot of folks are going to be partaking in the celebrating the 4th, but, keep in mind to please stay hydrated. Please stay hydrated as you go out and celebrate, as that heat, you don't want to take it lightly. And no, alcohol is not hydrating, does not count. It can make the heat worse. So just be safe, right? Be safe, as that can be a bit excessive for Saturday as well as into Sunday as the heat starts to ramp up in addition to that humidity. Good evening. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Nate at 8. By Monday, then, those showers and thunderstorms turn more likely in the afternoon and evening. Chance chances look to drop at least briefly Tuesday, picking back up for the middle to latter part of next week. I do think once that humidity picks up for the weekend, that we can stay upper 60s, around 70 for that dew point. So it could be a pretty humid stretch of weather for the weekend, continuing, I think, for a lot of next week. And again, just check out those overnight lows, right? I say this a lot, but notice those overnight lows are still low 60s here for the next couple of mornings, but notice what happens by the weekend, Sunday morning, Monday morning. Notice they're back upper 60s, around 70. So that's always a good indication that humidity is going to be picking up a bit more. And especially this time of the year, it's always check out those lows, right? We don't even have to dive into that dew point forecast. And where we bring out the muggy meter, you can just do that test, even just looking at those overnight lows. It's a good indication that it's going to be a pretty muggy stretch of weather. Again, 65 to 70 is a range where it's just uncomfortably humid. 70, 75, it's unbearably humid. 60 to 65 for the dew point is where we start to feel that humidity, but it's more tolerable. So if you can remember that range and then look at those overnight lows and see where they are in that range, it can be a pretty good indication of just how humid those days are going to feel based on those lows. And the reasoning is that oftentimes this time of the year, that low temperature, the dew point can be the limiting factor to how much those temperatures drop off at night. As temperatures do near the dew point, the air becomes saturated. And now as that occurs, it becomes very difficult for that air to continue to cool as the air becomes saturated. So that's why that dew point can be the limiting factor to how much temperatures drop off. And oftentimes, you deal with those temperatures near the dew point and the air becomes saturated, then you deal with some areas of fog as well. So that can occur at the same time going into those mornings. Austin, what's the record for 90 degrees or high in July? I'd have to do some digging on how many 90-degree days we've had in July. What's the record for 90 degrees or higher in July? I'd have to do the digging on that to see what just how many days we've had of 90 plus. I'm sure it's been quite a bit. Typically July is our warmest month of the year. That stretch when we get into July, even carrying over to August, that's typically our hottest stretch of the year. And I'm sure we've had quite a few 90-degree days before going through the month of July. And I did note as well, for this upcoming 4th of July on Friday, again, likely going to be a quiet Independence Day. And, really looking back, we've had a string here. We've had a handful of days without any measurable precipitation for the 4th of July at the Wheeling and Howe County Airport. So we have really lucked out. And I know someone, I think, mentioned that for yesterday, for the yesterday's edition of Nate at 8. It's been recent. I think it was yesterday. But I remember someone mentioning that just noting the nice stretch of 4th of July's we've had, and yes, certainly have. It's been a handful, I believe 5, and this would make 6 in a row where we've had no measurable precipitation at the Wheeling, Ohio County Airport. At most, a trace for one of those years. We have to go back looking into it. I believe it was 2019 that it was the last time we had measurable precipitation on the 4th of July at the Wheeling Howe County Airport. So enjoying a nice stretch here of Independence Days. And this year, I don't think it's any exception. It's going to be nice going into, in general, it's been nice today, and it'll be nice going through the weekend. We'll see that rain chances then I think further pick up early next week, and we could deal with more of those showers and thunderstorms at times as we go through next week. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. As always, you can catch me coming up News 9 at 10 on Fox 9. News 9 tonight at 11 for the latest. And as always, join me for that next edition of Nate at 8 tomorrow evening as we'll be dealing with that Thursday evening, that Independence Day Eve, the 4th of July Eve edition of Nate at 8. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. As always, I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and I'll see you on the next edition of Nate at 8.